This is Join Us in France, episode 225. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent. Are you getting ready for a trip to Paris, Provence, Normandy, maybe somewhere else in France, maybe the Grand Est? On this podcast, you'll hear informative conversations about France. On today's episode, my good friend and also a tour guide, Elyse, tells us about the lovely city of Nancy in the northeast of France, and that region is called the Grand Est. Nancy is a major center for Art Deco. We've mentioned it on several previous episodes for that reason, but it's good to finally dedicate an episode to it. So you know what else you can see there. Show notes and photos for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/225. Join Us in France is brought to you by Patreon supporters and Addicted to France, the small group tour company for people who want to enjoy France to the fullest and with as little stress as possible. Check out my upcoming half-day walking tours on May 7th and 8th on addictedtofrance.com. Hello, Elyse.
Hello, Annie.
Bonjour, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Ça va?
Ça va. Ça va.
Today we're talking about Nancy.
Nancy.
Not
not
the girl.
Nancy.
Yeah, not Nancy, no.
I was thinking that there's Nice, which is not nice. And then there's Nancy, which is not Nancy.
Well, there's probably others too.
There are probably others like that too, right? Nancy is a city in the region called Lorraine, which is east of Paris.
But the region technically now is called Grand Est, right?
Yeah, well, you know, this is the new nonsense, the administrative nonsense of France. It's like the region historically is the region of Lorraine. Mm-hmm. Just like if you go to the southeast, you go into the region that historically is Provence. People still call it Provence.
Yeah.
You know, the Dordogne and all of that. But yeah, technically, administratively, what happened was that the two parts that were the Alsatian parts, which were several departments, and then the 3 or 4 departments that were part of the Lorraine have joined together at the hip to be called the Grand Est. Is
Grand Est,
the Big East. Sounds like the name of a Western, but anyway, the Big East, not the Big West, the Big East,
Right, because the department that Nancy is in is Meurthe-et-Moselle.
Meurthe-et-Moselle, which is, of course, because there are 2 very beautiful rivers, actually. I think the Moselle is a little bit longer, but they join up just a few kilometers outside of the city of Nancy.
Oh, so I was wondering if they both cross the city or if it's just one of them.
No, they if I remember correctly, it's just on the outer edge of the city.
Okay.
That they join up. And don't ask me exactly the geographical thing about them. I know that the Moselle really is very long, and it goes up and out the northwest. The city of Metz, which is about 45 kilometers north of Nancy or 50 kilometers north, is on one of them. I don't remember which one, but where Nancy is, it's the joining of the two.
Don't worry, people. There won't be a quiz.
There won't be a quiz.
You can go to Nancy and not know these things. It doesn't matter.
No, but just to locate it for people who have no idea. And I know that some people have actually asked about it because it is known. And one of the things, of course, we'll talk about is the fact that it's considered to be the home of Art Nouveau in France. It's one of the places where it began, and there's some interesting historical information about why. But Nancy is actually a city, believe it or not, that gets 3 million visitors a year.
It's pretty. The photos look really pretty. And now I've never been, so I don't have my own photos. Right. And I put out a call on the website, on the Facebook group, to see if some people can give me some photos that I can use for this episode. Otherwise, I'll just use photos that are public domain.
Right, public domain. And then, of course, I think I sent you, but if I didn't, I'll do it because I downloaded them, some beautiful photos of some of the famous glassware and things that are part of the Art Nouveau that comes from there. But Nancy is, I lived near there for a while, a number of years ago, but I visited it a lot. It's a city that now is known, it's a medium-sized city. It's a city of a little over 100,000 people.
Oh.
Within the greater Nancy is almost 400,000. It's the 20th city in France. But
that's not bad, actually.
It's not bad at all.
I thought it was smaller than that.
No, it's a decent-sized city, and it's a very cultural city. It has a very big, prestigious university. Surprisingly, 60,000 students altogether, with part of the annex being Metz, because Metz is actually a city that's fairly close. And a lot of culture, a lot of culture, a lot of music, an opera house.
Yeah, they have an opera house.
Yeah, it's famous for being a place for a long time, going back, in fact, a couple of centuries, for being a center of art and culture.
Right, because cities that size normally don't have an opera house. I was surprised to see that.
Yeah,
I was like, wow.
And it's special in that way. And so it has a very good reputation. The weather in the area is not great. I was looking up the statistics yesterday. It's because it's inland and it's kind of in a basin. So it's on the eastern side. You have the Vosges Mountains, which are not very high. They're kind of like the Appalachians a little bit. They're beautiful, very wonderful thick forest, but. And to the west, it's a plain that leads you towards the Champagne area and back into Paris. So it gets cold in the winter and humid.
Lovely. All the things that I love.
I love you. And it gets hot and humid, but not super hot in the summer.
Yeah.
But it's very, very, very green in the area. The whole region around there is very beautiful. It's very
You won't need any sprinklers.
No. You don't need sprinklers. And it's very much... little rolling hills and stuff like that. I mean,
nice.
it's that kind of a land, And it's now that there's the bullet train. It's a 90-minute ride from Paris.
That's nice.
Which means you could literally actually go for a day and go back to Paris. It's on the line that goes Paris-Strasbourg. So, and it's
probably not every TGV that stops in Nancy.
I would think that they do if it's the direct line, because it's fairly important as a city. So unless it's...
You'd have to check on it. If you're going to do that, obviously you have to check.
But I remember at the time was living in the area. I actually did it by train and by car, going back and forth to Paris. So it's 280 kilometers by car. So it's a ride. It's only 115 kilometers east to get to Strasbourg. So it's really the northeastern part of France.
Yeah.
It's a region that is very much a part of that history of that whole part of France. And Nancy...
That has strong German influence.
Yes, not as much as Alsace,
right.
not as much as Strasbourg, but it's also connected to it. And it's interesting because so Nancy is now a city that's got a very... Let's put it this way. I'd say it's a city that has a very positive reputation in general for its activities, for its culture, for the fact that it's got these famous squares that are part of the World UNESCO Heritage Site with very beautiful architecture around them. And it has always been the capital of this, what once was a separate kingdom, the Kingdom of Lorraine. Which had a duke. And, this is something I have no answer to, because I was thinking about this yesterday. In Provence and in the south, there were separate kingdoms. And sometimes it was a duke, like in Provence. And sometimes it was a count, like in the region around Toulouse. But these were separate kingdoms. So why weren't they kings? I don't know. This is a question I have no answer to.
Don't know that either.
They were called the duchy, the
duchy, yeah.
The duchy. So you have the one there was one in Burgundy as well. A lot of these were...
And some of these were richer than the King of France anyway. I mean, like le Duché de Bourgogne.
He wanted to become King of France, basically. Yeah. So that was just one of those silly... I don't know the answer to that question kind of things. Like, okay.
If somebody knows out there, let us know.
I don't know.
Like to know.
I mean, these were all descendants. Anyway, so a little background information. Lorraine is a fairly big area. Well, now, of course, with this greater east, it includes the Alsatian area. But in fact, stuff I didn't know until I was doing some background information, the name Lorraine comes from a word that comes from the time of Charlemagne, believe it or not. And it was because the great-grandson of Charlemagne's name was Lothaire.
Oh, yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
Lothaire. Charlemagne created this empire, which included all of what is now France and a good chunk of what is now Germany. Mm-hmm. And when he died, it was divided into 3 kingdoms. And when those 3 sons started fighting with each other, one of them got kicked out, and the other 2, I don't remember which 2, divided it all up. Mm-hmm. And the one of the son that got the eastern part of France and what is now most of Western Germany, he had the same problem with his sons. Typical, obviously. And so by the time you get to the great-grandson, which is in the 900s, they've divvied it up into several smaller little kingdoms,
duchies,
and one of them is the kingdom run by this great grandson named Lothaire. And the word Lothaire the name led to Lotharingle.
Okay.
And then if you follow it, I don't know, there's this kind of like weird derivation linguistically. Mm-hmm. And then it turns out that the way it started being pronounced sounds almost like Lorraine.
Yeah.
So basically, the name Lorraine really comes from the name of the kingdom at the time, which is based on this great-grandson. So, which is a way of saying that it goes back very far.
Yes.
It goes back to the 900s, which is really the beginning of a unified Western Europe kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it was a separate kingdom. And of course, it was Germanic. I mean, Charlemagne was basically German, as we would know it now, Teutonic, So whatever language they spoke, it was only later on with the influence of people from other regions that it came to be the language that everyone speaks here now, which of course is French. But the influence of the Germanic part certainly stays more in that part of France than anywhere else. Less so than in Alsace, because Alsace, unlike Lorraine, wound up being taken back by Prussia and by the Germans several times in the last 200 years. And the people there were forced to go from being French to German and back and forth. Mm-hmm. And in fact, one of the things that happened starting at the end of the 19th century with the war in 1870-71 with Prussia, when they invaded France and actually managed to get as far as Paris, is that a lot of people from the Alsatian area fled and went to Lorraine.
I see.
So a lot of the people that are in Nancy now are descendants of people who originally were far more Germanic, but who fled because they did not want to become part of the Germanic Empire. They wanted to stay French, and it was an area that really got bounced back and forth a whole lot over the course of centuries, and lots of fighting. The Duke of Burgundy tried to take it. There were all these other groups. It's so complicated that I was having a hard time. It kind of made my head spin reading about all the different dukes and the different thises and thatses that were trying to fight over this area. And interestingly enough, one of the reasons is because the land is very rich. It's also a main...
You mean for agriculture?
Minerals.
I see.
Agriculture too. I have to say, having lived in that area for a year, I've never seen such fat cows. Really. I mean, Munster cheese and a bunch of other cheeses that they're made, they come from the cows in that area, and the cows are happy there. Mm-hmm. This is, you and I might not be because of the weather.
Yes.
The cows love it. They love it. There's so much for them to chew on, you would not believe it. Really. I never seen such fat cows in my life.
Wow.
But the land is also very rich in ore. There are lots of iron, lots of minerals, and historically coal, which of course is more of the 18th and 19th century. Up until recently, there were no more coal mines in France, but they were up in that area. And the fact that there were coal mines the fact that there was a lot of running water and a lot of forest made it conducive to being an area for metallurgy. Okay, so it's something that goes back centuries and centuries and centuries. Textiles and metals were the two things that made the area prosperous, starting way back in the Middle Ages. And of course, that has to do with the land and the geography of it. And because it was that rich, and because it was kind of it's not a flat plain, but it's really kind of a buffer zone between the German Holy Roman Empire and all of these empires to the east. And then, of course, you have the King of France, who at the time was not such a big deal. And then, of course, you have the Duke of Brittany and all of the other things that eventually become the part of France. It was an area that was fought over enormously.
Yeah.
And the battles and the battles and the battles. I mean, starting in the 1500s and the 1600s. And it really makes your head spin. I mean, it's unless you're a specialist in that part of, time and history,
right.
It's hard to know. But what happens is the moment at which it becomes really pertinent for us is there's actually a war between the king of Sweden. Don't ask me what his name is. I don't remember. And the Germanic king. And because there's a stalemate, they decide, for reasons that are strange and largely political, to take a descendant of the King of Poland, whose family has intermarried with both the Germans and the Swedes, and to put him almost as a figurehead, as the head of this region.
Okay.
And so what happens is that we get to the 1700s, 18th century, and all of a sudden there is a Polish man named Stanislaus who was made King of Lorraine.
Okay, now that's starting to make sense.
Now it's starting to make sense, right?
Yes.
Duke of Lorraine, actually, was officially his title. But he was supposed to be there basically as a puppet to take care of, this truce that was set up between the Germanic Empire and the Swedes, who at that time controlled all of Northern Europe anyway, including what is now Denmark and all the rest. And it turns out that this man named Stanislaus was extremely cultivated. The kingdoms of Poland at that time, like Russia in the end of the 17th century and beginning of the 18th century, were very, very Francophile. So everyone spoke French. France was the summum of culture and of refinement. And so this man, Stanislaus, he set up the first institutions of art and music and made Nancy his capital.
Okay.
Which had been a medieval city for a very long time.
Yeah, and his statue is on the main plaza.
His statue is on
there.
Yes, and it's the good, now it's the good King Stanislaus. I don't think at the time they would have all said that, but, And then what happens to seal this alignment or association with France is that through a lot of machination and politics, lo and behold, one of his two daughters winds up becoming the wife of Louis XV.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which...
Louis XV, who is a king who winds up being king for a very long time, who, don't forget, is the great-grandson of Louis XIV.
Yes.
Okay. He was originally supposed to marry the daughter of the King of Spain when he was 12 and she was 6. Don't laugh out there, everybody. Don't be shocked. They waited a long time before they actually had anything happen. But what happened was that for various reasons, which included the fact that they were worried because Louis XV was being taken care of by his mom.
Yes.
And by Richelieu.
Yes.
Because he was a minor.
Right.
And so there was a worry that if he didn't get married very quickly, and we're talking about the age of 13, 14 years old, and have a child right away, he could be usurped by one of his first cousins who was claiming the throne as well. And so what happened was they sent this poor little girl who was 6 years old back to Spain
Right, because at 6, there's no way she could have
No,
an heir.
but he would have been. What happens is that they would take people to the court and then have them brought up in the court
I see.
in the years of waiting, so that it's so strange. I mean, it's just
Right. So if your daughter was to be the Queen of France, you sent her to France to
Yes,
be
right.
raised in the court.
Exactly.
Until she was of age.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is what happened with all of them, with England, with France, with Spain, with the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, this is what they did. So what happened was they created a huge royal scandal in Europe because they literally sent this little child back to Spain, and they had to.
That one would take too long.
Too long.
Yeah.
So they needed somebody who literally could produce a child rather quickly.
I see.
So at first there was a suggestion of various different princesses, and of course everybody who's listened to any of these know by now that these are all cousins anyway. I mean, we're just talking about first, second, or third degree, but we're still all dealing with family. And someone suggests this daughter of Stanislaus, who is the Duke of Lorraine, but who is not considered to be as important in the lines of nobility as a descendant of the King of Sweden or the Holy Roman Empire. And at first, the counselors for Louis XV go, nah, she's not important enough. She's not good enough. And the problem was he was 14 and she was 22. 21 or 22.
Yeah, well, she was plenty ready to have a baby.
She was plenty ready to have a baby. And the reason she hadn't yet been married off was because she was not important enough. Yeah. And so what happened was, for various reasons that I'm not quite sure I understand completely, finally it was decided that this is what would happen. So, indeed, Louis XV wound up marrying Anne, I think the last name is pronounced Leszczyńska, the daughter, one of the two daughters of the Duke of Lorraine. Therefore, the Duke of Lorraine becomes his father-in-law.
Yeah.
And becomes a member, by extension, of the royal French family.
Sure.
And Lorraine, at that point, becomes attached to the Kingdom of France. And we are in the 1750s.
Okay.
And then smack dab in the middle of the 18th century. And by virtue of becoming a part of France, has all the benefits of the richness of the Kingdom of France, but also France can now take all of the riches out of the region of Lorraine, and also makes it a nice buffer for them against the Germans.
The Germans, keep them away. Yeah.
So this is really the beginning of what we could call modern Nancy and Lorraine, because it turns out that this man named Stanislaus, who is more interested in art and culture and literature and science than in politics and war, he has these magnificent squares built, that one of which is now this famous Place Stanislaus, with beautiful, beautiful buildings in classical, mid-18th century classical style architecture around it, with this famous statue that, by the way, is a rebuilt one because things were destroyed at the time of the Revolution and then built back up again. And Nancy becomes famous for its culture and for its arts and for its refinement.
So did they build this beautiful fence around
the
like
wrought
the
iron
gate? The wrought iron gate.
Yes.
It was built then.
It was built then. Now, the reality is a little bit like the facade of Notre Dame. Unfortunately, a lot of what there is today was rebuilt in the middle of the 19th century.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it was destroyed. Now, the buildings, the City Hall and several of the other magnificent buildings that are surround the main square, the Place Stanislaus, are the original, but some of them are not. I don't know if it's possible to tell the difference, to be honest.
You know, if you've ever been to Versailles, you know how beautiful the gate to get into Versailles is?
Yes.
It's that sort of thing, except even more over the top, I think.
It's very over the top.
Yeah, it's this black wrought iron with gold. It's gorgeous.
It's absolutely gorgeous.
I'll put a picture on the website. It's just gorgeous. And I've known about this Place Stanislas, for as long as I can remember, even though I've never been.
Right.
But it's one of the plazas in France that is famous for being particularly gorgeous.
Right. And in fact, it was first called the Royal Square. And it wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that it went started being called Place Stanislaus in honor of the Duke, the Polish Duke, who, of course, brought all this in. Also, one of the things that made Nancy really important was that it was established as a free zone. And what that meant was that there were very few taxes. And because it was no longer the Middle Ages, but there was still a vestige of the Middle Ages in the sense that you couldn't decide to join a craft or be a tradesperson of a specific kind unless you were allowed into the guild, unless you had a specific kind of apprenticeship or training. And they declared the area of Nancy and right around it a free zone to bring people in that could choose what they wanted to do, and they didn't have to go through this process. And in the end, it made it an extremely prosperous city.
Yeah.
So for a very long time, Nancy was known to be really a very, very wonderful place for all kinds of different crafts and tradespeople to go, and they were free to develop what they wanted to, and so commerce was very, very important there.
Right. Yeah, because a lot of for some trades, it still works this way in France. There are some professions where you have to have a specific diploma to be able to practice that profession. And of course, it makes sense when it comes to doctors and lawyers and people like that. But when it's about a cook or about a baker or something, in France, you still have to you can't open a bakery if you don't have the diploma.
That's right.
Which, is kind of silly because you can be a perfectly good baker without the diploma.
Right. But it's true that France is kind of obsessed by the diploma thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
still to this
I can
day.
defend it certainly as a guide, but I understand that there are times when it's really something that's
true.
a little
Tour
bit
guides,
too much.
you're the kind of tour guide that has the diploma.
Yes.
And there's bazillions out there who don't have the diploma.
Right.
And that doesn't mean they're bad at it. It just means they don't have the diploma.
It means they don't have the diploma and they don't have the background, but they sometimes learn it. I mean, I think there's also that it was a way of controlling quality for a long time. I think that's what it was. Of course, we still have what we call the guilds that work on historical monuments. You have to have been a member of be a compagnon,
right,
to work on any historical
makes sense
building.
To me.
So anyway, and then again, textiles, silk, and tapestries became one of the main industries during this time, and it really is amazing because the history of Nancy is. There are some parts of France and some cities in France where that there's, I don't know how to explain it. It's like there's a part of their history that has to do with misery and stuff like that. Not Nancy. I mean, I'm sure that they had the plague go through there, and I'm sure that there were, not everyone was rich. But it's a city that historically is associated with a certain kind of affluence and a certain kind of culture. And it's interesting how it's been that way for such a very, very, very long time.
Interesting.
And so what happens is Nancy, however, because it is the capital of Lorraine, really also becomes the victim of the wars, in the sense that the War of 1870-71, which was when the Prussians invaded France, and then you have annexation by Germany of Alsace, and so you have thousands of people fleeing west into the region on the other side of the Vosges Mountains to the Lorraine. In 1914, the same thing happens. You have a group of people who are actually given the choice to whether to stay and become French or to go back to being German. And so there's this flux of people back and forth going both ways. It's very, very strange. But it's starting in the 19th century that industry, serious industry, develops in this area. And this is when you have the major development of coal mines, which are again, old mountains like the Appalachians in the States. This is where you have coal. The older the mountains, the more fossil fuel and things like that. And starting in the 1880s, steel factories developed there because of all the iron ore that is in the area. And their university, which was first created just about 30 years before the revolution in the 18th century, and was considered to be a new one at the time. It gets shut down during the French Revolution, like most of the universities did for a certain amount of time. And because of that, the intellectuals fled to other parts of France. And so by the time they, try to reopen it, which is in the 1840s, 1850s, they have to recruit people and bring them back to create this new university again. And the first two schools that they open up there which are actually still very, very well known in France, are their School of Medicine and Pharmacy. Mm. And then they have a School of Engineering for Mines, which makes sense when you consider what is in the area.
Sure.
And then they bring back the Opera House, and they bring back the arts and the letters. And since the middle of the 19th century, the university there has flourished. However, what happens again is that World War II, the Germans take over Nancy and all of the area before they head west towards Paris. And so all of these people, you can really imagine how awful it must be for 4 generations of people who have been battered back and forth between the German part and the French part, and then suffering war and persecution at the same time. And there's a fairly important Jewish population in Alsace and in Lorraine. All of them, they have to flee. Mm-hmm. And then the people are taken into forced labor in Lorraine. And because Lorraine, a little bit kind of in the same way that Toulouse in the southwest has a certain spirit of resistance, believe it or not, the intellectuals of the university and the intellectuals and the doctors and the lawyers and the people of the city of Nancy put up such a resistance that the University of Nancy is the only university in the history of France to receive the Legion of Honor for bravery as an entity.
Wow.
Because they saved people all the time.
Huh.
Because they protected people, they saved people. And the police force, the civil police force of Nancy, is the only police force of any important city in France during World War II to have been known to save people.
Right, because most of the time, in most of France, when the Germans would call on French police to go do their dirty work. And a lot of police departments
did it.
Complied.
Certainly did.
They said, well, they're the people in charge. We're going to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's part of the prestige, let's say, of the history of Nancy. Now, one of the other reasons why Nancy is famous, and one of the reasons people go there, is because it is the home of, or one of the homes in Europe, of what is called Art Nouveau. Mm-hmm. Now, how does that work?
They have a
school. It was actually called l'École de Nancy. Mm-hmm. It's now more easily referred to as the Art Nouveau School, but its official title was the l'École de Nancy. Mm-hmm. Art Nouveau is a movement that was a crafts movement as opposed to a fine arts movement. And it began in the 1890s. And it was begun in the area of Nancy and Lorraine for exactly this reason that historically it was an area that had lots of glass work, lots of metal work, lots of textile work. And the purpose of the School of Nancy, which was founded by some very famous people, if you know anything about the history of decorative arts, I'll mention a couple of them in a minute, was to how do you say in English? I can't even remember anymore. How do you say valorize?
Valoriser?
Valoriser.
To improve?
To make more prestigious, I guess we could say. Make more prestigious the crafts and the arts connected to industry.
Okay.
So this is far from a school of painting and sculpture. This is not what we're talking about. This is about fine furniture, pieces, unique pieces made out of crystal or blown glass, textiles, metalwork, even architecture. Everything that is a combination of artistic work and industry in the sense of crafts. Mm-hmm. And so that is the function and the purpose of this school called the École de Nancy. And the movement, which I'm sure most people in their minds they can imagine, is based on vegetation and lines that are curves.
Yeah.
Why? Well, partly because people were kind of tired of the classical rigid architecture that had been really what was the most important thing in the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. And also the 19th century, which is kind of a weird time. I think we've mentioned it a few times. It's a kind of a time of pseudo everything. So everything's like recopying Gothic architecture, recopying Romanesque, Byzantine. There was like they were looking for something new. Nobody could figure out what they wanted to do, and then all of a sudden, these craftspeople who were kind of tired of all of these other things, they started talking about going back to nature, which is part of a very kind of big romantic movement, and searching for inspiration in plants and in nature. And this is the inspiration, which is why when you see posters or pieces of gorgeous glasswork or furniture, everything has curves.
Yes.
And the windows on the houses of the Art Nouveau movement have gorgeous curves on them. And,
right. I don't know how they do that.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. And of course, the idea was to create unique individual pieces that then could be reproduced en masse by industry. So there's this very social context involved in this whole thing of the Art Nouveau movement. And so two or three of the people that are the most famous, two of them, one is a man named Louis Gallet.
Right.
Who was, in fact, I was doing some more reading about him yesterday, and boy, would I have loved to have met him. He sounds like just the most amazing person. Sorry, Émile Gallet. And then another who wound up creating a factory for the making of crystal and blown glass and furniture, and extended it beyond to other things. There's also Antonin Dôme, who became famous for his magnificent glass and crystalware. And then two people who were famous for their furniture and architecture, and that is a man named Victor Prouvé. Prouvé, whose furniture
P-R-O-U-V-E.
Yeah, whose furniture is in the Orsay, in the selection of Art Nouveau. You see the beautiful pieces made out of fine wood with the curves.
This beautiful curvy wood.
Curvy wood. And Louis Majoral. And Louis Majoral was an architect who made many of the houses that are still standing in two of the neighborhoods of Nancy, where you can see the gorgeous curves around the windows, the curves around the doors.
So do they have like whole neighborhoods built like that?
Two neighborhoods. There are two neighborhoods still left. One is called Saurupt, Saurupt.
Okay.
There are two neighborhoods where people go to walk the streets and take a look at some of these, because these are the original buildings made at the very beginning of the whole Art Nouveau movement.
Uh-huh.
And so the first president of the School of Nancy was Émile Gallet.
Yeah.
But he was also, this is why I kind of like him, he was very politically engaged, so that he wanted to create a world where the workers had good salaries, good conditions. He and his wife, who was a designer for him, that worked with him in the École de Nancy and in his factory, they took political positions. They were friends with Victor Hugo and people like that. They had positions that were fairly unpopular in a Nancy that was otherwise very conservative politically. For instance, they defended Dreyfus. During the affair of Dreyfus, the Captain Dreyfus. And apparently what happened was that towards the end of his life, because he didn't die very old, he was 58 when he died, which was in 1904, people started shunning their work. And they refused to buy it because they didn't agree with their politics, because they were fairly advanced in their attitudes towards politics. They were much more inclusive, let's put it that way. We would call it more like that, I think, today than anything else. But they were the inspiration for the whole idea of what Art Nouveau was. Now, the movement itself only lasted officially, really, from 1890 till 1909. Why 1909? I'm not really sure, because the School of Nancy, once Émile Gallet died, it was Victor Prouvé who took over. And so the school continued. And it actually still exists as a decorative art school. You can go and actually study at the School of Nancy. But what happened was that more or less by 1909, 1910, what was originally Art Nouveau with all of these curlicues and curves and started to become, I guess, a bit too excessive. started getting cleaner and wound up becoming Art Deco.
Right.
And Art Deco, if you look at the area of Trocadero in Paris or places like that, suddenly you see that we're dealing with far more symmetrical straight lines.
Yeah.
With a little bit of
massive
curve.
like
A little bit of curve, but much more massive and straight line, and very simple. The opposite of ornate, which is what the Art Nouveau movement was all about. But it's interesting that Art Nouveau was called something different. There were 6 or 7 different countries in Western Europe that all developed the same philosophy of art, and each of these countries called it something different. So in France, it's called Art Nouveau, but there was the same thing in Prague, in Czechoslovakia. At the time, it was Czechoslovakia, in Belgium, in England, in Scotland, in Germany. In each of these countries, not in Spain, it didn't exist in Spain, but in each of these countries, there was a similar movement. There was a lot of communication between these different craftspeople and artists. And you can see that there's a certain similarity, not always in the style of what they did, but each country called it something slightly different. But it was exactly the same time period and the same movement.
Right. And we've done an episode about Art Nouveau.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the number.
I don't remember the number.
I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But
it's really fascinating to see the 2 Art Nouveau neighborhoods are then Saurupt and Saint-Léon.
Okay.
And you can walk through these streets. I remember it, but I couldn't say if I knew exactly how big these neighborhoods are. They're not that big. Nancy isn't the old city center isn't that big anyway. But it's very beautiful to walk around and just see all of these buildings. And of course, the School of Nancy exists. And also there's a very, very, very beautiful Museum of Fine Arts. Very beautiful. Not that big, but filled with wonderful work. That is, of course, more painting and sculpture that was inspired by the same movements, plus, of course, more historical, older paintings, and then some more recent, but very, very interesting work, a very beautiful place. So between the Art Nouveau parts of town and the 3 squares, the Place Stanislas, the Place de la Carrière, and the Place de l'Alliance, all 3 of those, which are gorgeous classical squares with beautiful buildings around them. As you mentioned before, classical architecture is more or less simple with 3 levels of windows, but on the tops of these are very decorative curlicue pieces. They couldn't get over just like the wrought iron work, which is absolutely fabulous. And there's a small part of Old Town that is still medieval. Very, very small.
Okay.
With a gate, a medieval gate, and a bell tower, and a few other pieces like that, because the original...
Sounds like a lovely place to visit just for a day.
Oh, it's really beautiful.
I think while you're talking, I'm thinking, I can't remember the name of the person, but one of the listeners did an episode with me where she mentions taking the train for a day to Nancy.
Go there.
Yeah, and back.
And then just as a way of sort of finishing up talking about Nancy and Lorraine, we have the few dishes or foods that are associated with...
Now you're talking. The food, of course.
We can't talk about wine. This is not wine country. You have to go a little bit west to Champagne, or you have to go east to Alsace to get your wine. But it's not very far. You can do that in a half an hour, actually, pretty much going over the hills into Alsace. But of course, the first thing that comes to mind, is quiche Lorraine.
Quiche Lorraine, of course.
Lorraine. All of these dishes were made for this wonderful Duke Stanislaus and his court.
Why do you call him Stanislaus? It's Stanislas.
Stanislaus, A-U-S.
In French, he might be Stanislas with no U.
Maybe, but it's...
Yeah, you're speaking English.
I'm speaking English
Yeah.
and Polish.
Stanislaus.
I get that. I think that's how you say it. Quiche Lorraine, which of course is a basic quiche. A comment about the word quiche, because I know that it happens that now in the States, we call any savory tart a quiche. And in France, if you say quiche, people assume it's quiche Lorraine.
Yes, it's going to have eggs and
bacon.
Cream and usually bacon
right.
And grated cheese.
And grated cheese.
Yeah.
And other kinds of savory tarts are not called quiche Lorraine.
No, they're called tarte salée.
Tarte salée, right.
Tarte salée.
But if you go
So
to the
salty
States or if
tarts.
you talk to an American, they will say, what kind of quiche do you have today? And there it is.
I see.
Okay?
I see.
So the word quiche has become this kind of generic term for any savory tart.
Right,
As opposed
okay.
to just quiche Lorraine.
Okay. Yeah, in France, it's still quiche Lorraine.
It's still quiche Lorraine. Okay.
Yeah.
So this quiche Lorraine, baba au rhum.
Le baba au rhum.
It was invented for him.
Delicious.
He must have had a sweet tooth.
Yeah, this is like it's like a sponge cake with a hole in the middle, and they
rum.
put rum in the
And
middle,
then
and it's
there's
very
a cream.
sweet.
There's a bit of a pastry cream too.
Maybe.
But it's
never
a
order
raised
that.
dough. It's a little bit like it's a raised dough, I think, the baba au rhum. It's
Yeah, it's like a sponge cake.
but I think it's made with bread yeast. I think.
Could be. I don't know.
But anyway, it's soaked in rum.
Yeah,
I love it. Some people don't like that because they don't like pastries with
Alcohol.
With alcohol. I happen to
Yeah, you
like
it.
that.
I haven't had one in so long.
No.
Yeah.
But and la madeleine.
Madeleine is from there
Yes,
too.
It's from there too. It was also all of these things were invented in the middle of the 18th century for the court of the Duke Stanislas.
I see. So Madeleine was invented for him.
Yes, and the Madeleine.
And who is it that invented it? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know the name of the cook.
Okay.
It probably is the name of a cook somewhere.
Yeah.
But if those people out there who don't know what a Madeleine is, and of course it's in Proust, if you haven't read your Proust,
Yeah.
who has read their Proust actually?
Yes.
It's a wonderful little cake that's in the form of a shell.
Yeah, it's a shell with a little
It's a
raised
shell
bump in the middle.
with a
It's
raised
lovely.
bump in the middle, but it's this wonderful kind of like a light version of a pound cake. I love them.
Yeah, it's
I
much-
absolutely-
it's much lighter
I
than a
love
pound cake.
Madeleine. I
Yeah.
just love them. Now, I think I'd actually have a Madeleine
They're
over
very
a
nice
baba
in-
au
in
rhum.
tea.
Yeah. Yes, and the last of these, la bouchée de la reine.
La bouchée à la reine.
Les
Les bouchées à la
C'était
reine.
marqué comme ça, bouchée de la reine.
Yeah, well, it's somebody who
okay.
doesn't know French. Which there are many bloggers out there who talk about France.
But this was on
endlessly
Wikipedia,
and they don't
so
know
I
anything.
don't know. This was on
Well,
Wikipedia.
Also, that,
Yeah.
that gets...
But so what we have is what? A flaky pastry cup filled with basically, I think traditionally meat and mushrooms in a cream sauce. I think that's the
Right.
or
So
veal and mushrooms in a cream
yeah,
sauce.
so in my family, my mother made bouchée à la reine, but it was with a beef and mushroom and green olive sauce.
Right.
But that was my version of it.
Right.
I don't know. There must be, I mean, you could probably fill this up with, comment ça s'appelle, les trucs de Lyon, les quenelles.
Canal.
Quenelles de Lyon.
Yes,
If
yes.
you
With,
do-
I
if you
think
do
I all-
quenelle,
the common denominator seems to be the sauce.
yeah,
really.
it's usually a white sauce.
It's usually served as a first course, I believe.
Yes, in fancy restaurants, but my mother made it as a main dish.
As a main dish.
Yeah, yeah.
I certainly never made anything like it.
Because it would take you a long time to make that. For it's like a puff.
It's a puff
It's
paste.
a pastry. It's a puff pastry.
like a cup, right?
But it's shaped like a cup. And in
Right.
France, you can buy it.
Yeah.
At any grocery store will have it. It's a common food, but it's what you put in it
Right.
and over it that's delicious.
I mean, did your mom actually make the pastry herself?
No. She always bought it. She just bought it.
That would be a lot of work.
Yeah, that would be a lot of work.
But those are just some of the things that actually originate from there.
Oh, those are
And
all, they all sound good.
Mirabelle, which is, of course, a
La poire
wonderful...
Mirabelle?
Yeah, it's a tiny little
La prune
yellow...
Mirabelle.
La
C'est une-
pr- the
c'est une prune, c'est pas une poire.
Tiny little... Yeah. Tiny little yellow plum
Yeah.
that grows there, and then on the other side in Alsace, which is where it's made actually into a liqueur, but it's totally delicious. And so you get the tarte à la Mirabelle, which is just wonderful to eat.
Oh, yeah,
as
that's
well.
good too, yeah.
And then if you stay in Nancy, it's actually a good place to stay if you want to have a day or two to go explore the Vosges Mountains. Now, the Vosges
There's probably
Mountains,
some good hikes.
they're wonderful hikes there. I did this a lot while I was living in that area. They're not very high. It's very beautiful, dense forests, a lot of evergreen tree forests, lakes, lots of hikes. Really in the winter, there's some cross-country skiing.
I would bet that their local tourism board would probably have like developed hikes and circuits and, walking paths that you can do and all of that.
It's very, very beautiful. There are a couple of places where there are old castles in the forest, but mostly it's just it's a region, if you are familiar with some of the northern Appalachian regions, like as you get into Pennsylvania or even upstate New York. I mean, it's not quite that cold, but it's very similar. It's old, rounded mountains. It's very, very beautiful. Turns gorgeous colors in the fall.
I bet it does.
Really beautiful. So from the Vosges Mountains, you have the Lorraine area with small cities around that circle around Nancy. And then if you go east, you get to Alsace.
Do you happen to know what the main industry is there now?
Well, to be truthful, the main industries are gone. That is, it used to be
metallurgy is gone.
Heavily mines and textiles.
Yeah.
There are still crystal and ceramics made in the area. It's one of the few things that have stayed in the area. So, for instance, the dome factories, dome is magnificent for crystal and glass.
Now that's D-O-M-M.
D-O-U-M.
Oh, D-O-U-M.
Dome, yeah.
No E?
No.
Dome.
They still exist.
Oh, I thought it was dome.
Baccarat is in the area too.
Okay.
Because it's the crystals. I mean, it's, and of course, crystal, the difference between crystal and glass is crystal has lead in it. Right? There's a little bit of textile, but not very much. Even when I was living there, it was kind of sad to see these small towns. Kind of, if you go away from Nancy and more into the foothills of the Vosges, it's kind of a little bit like parts of eastern Pennsylvania where there used to be a lot of industry and it's kind of closed down.
Not anymore, yeah.
Not anymore. So you have now, of course, service industry far more. Tourism, which is very important for the Vosges and for the whole region, and agriculture as well. But in terms of industry, in the sense that we understand the term, it's mostly now connected to glass, crystal, and a little bit still of textiles. There's some tapestry work in the area. The mines are all gone.
Oh, yeah. All gone. I don't think we have a single mine left in France.
The steel factories are all gone.
Yeah. Too polluting.
Right, exactly. So, and that, of course, all happened right after World War II, really.
Yeah.
It's pretty much dissolved after a couple of decades. So I think the service industries have really taken up. For instance, Nancy is it's the capital of the area. So it has all of the things, including the university and the hospital and all of that. If you go to a small town nearby, which is actually where I lived, which is called Épinal, which is a city of 55,000 people. It's got a 2-year university program where afterwards you have to go to Nancy or further away.
Somewhere else, yeah.
It's got a couple of, schools. It's got a small but nice little art museum. But it's a small town.
How did you end up there anyway?
Fulbright.
Oh.
I got me a Fulbright.
Nice.
Yeah.
You're a smart woman.
Yeah. It wasn't bad, except the weather was atrocious. The heat went on at the end of August. This is on the other side of this is south of Nancy. So it's about 60 kilometers south of Nancy. And it's more into the forest area. So it's kind of like in a little bit of a cuvette. So it's bottom of a little bit of a valley, and it's surrounded by really exquisite land. I mean, the forests there are beautiful. A lot of people would go mushroom hunting.
Yeah.
Also, there are places in the forest there where there are signs, and sometimes not signs, about things that are left from World War I, because there was a lot of fighting in that area during World War I. But it's to do anything more, either culturally or even to go to big stores and stuff like that, you have to kind of go up to Nancy, which is a sophisticated city.
Yeah, because Épinal is just too small.
It's small,
You're
small.
a city girl.
I was a city girl,
Yeah.
I mean, it was the museum was nice, actually. It was a nice, and also there's actually a small but very interesting art school in Épinal. But you have 2 or 3 cities like that. One is Saint-Dié, which is really in the Vosges Mountains.
Saint-Dié or Saint-Didier?
Saint-Dié, D-I-E, with an accent. Yeah.
Okay. Never heard of it.
Right. Rimont, I think it's called Rimont or something like that. There are small towns that are 10, 15,000 people. Épinal, the sous-préfecture. So
yeah,
it's
55.
It's kind of the same size as Albi, but it feels much, or at least when I was there, it felt much smaller than Albi, because it's surrounded really by forest and pasture land.
Yeah.
But it's a region that is very beautiful to both visit the towns and also explore, going hiking, and there's lots of lakes and lots of things like that. So in the summertime, it's wonderful.
Yeah, when the weather is good, it's nice.
That's weather good. So that's basically, the Lorraine. I mean, you get further east, you go into Alsace. If you go north, you get into the northern part of Moselle and the city of Metz, and eventually you get to Luxembourg. Not that far away.
Right.
So we're really talking about the northeast corner of France.
But it's cool that you can go on the TGV and just do it as a day trip.
Yes, it's absolutely wonderful.
You probably would have to get up early in the morning, and you wouldn't get home back to your hotel till 10 or something p.m. But still, you can do it in the day.
You can do it.
That's kind of cool.
You can do it. I mean, you and I, we've done a podcast about Strasbourg, which of course is absolutely fabulous and a huge and much, much bigger city. But Nancy is worth a stop, whether you're staying in Strasbourg or whether you're staying in Paris, either on the way or literally, make it like Reims. These are both places that are great for a day.
Yes, so you could go from Paris, you could go to Reims and then to Nancy and then to Strasbourg and then back to Paris.
Yeah, but not all in one day.
No, not all in one day, no. That would take 3 days.
It would take 3 days, but it'd be a great little circuit.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Elyse.
You are quite welcome, honey.
Merci beaucoup.
De rien.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you, Jen, Jim Davis, and Renee Vigil for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And my thanks also to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. Thank you for giving back. Would you buy me a coffee if we met in real life? Well, you can do that by supporting the show for as little as $2 a month on patreon.com. That's patreon.com/join us to see the different reward tiers. And thank you so much for giving back. Patron Sonia Duffy responded to a reward I posted titled, "Why did Napoleon and Marie Antoinette have to die?" And she said, "Very interesting. Your essay filled in some blanks of my knowledge about the revolution." Thank you for the feedback, Sonia. And you know what? Helping you see the big picture about French history is really important to me. I think it's too easy to know bits of lots of things, but getting the big picture is not as easy as all that. So I'm glad it's working for you. And thank you, Marika Olive, for your generous one-time donation. Marika wrote, "Bonjour, Annie. I wanted to thank you and Elyse for the Join Us in France podcast. I just got back from my first, mostly solo trip to Paris for 11 days. I started listening to your podcast in December to prepare, and it was invaluable. Thank you for what you do." Thank you so much, Marika, and thank you for giving back. I'm glad the podcast was helpful. And as you know, because you're listening to me right now, you can hear Join Us in France anywhere you get your podcasts. But if you want to help other people listen to the show, and I hope you do, tell them that they can listen on Pandora, Spotify, Alexa, Google Home, YouTube, and of course on the website joinusinfrance.com as well. If you're going to be in Paris May 7th or May 8th, I'd love to meet you on one of my walking tours. Those are just half-day walking tours. They're pretty inexpensive, and they are going to be a lot of fun. Go to addictedtofrance.com for all the details. Have a great week of trip planning, and I will talk to you next Sunday. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2019 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.